The sun cast long shadows across the Montana prairie as Nathan Holt lowered his weathered hat against the glare, his gaze fixed on the faded patch of ground where Willa had collapsed just 6 months prior. The memory haunted him daily, her face pale as parchment, the sudden way her knees had buckled while they worked the field together. That day changed everything between them, creating a chasm he didn't know how to cross. Nathan removed his hat, running calloused fingers through his sweat-dampened hair. August 1878 had brought relentless heat to Cottonwood Valley, and today was no exception. The wheat field before him rippled like a golden ocean under the afternoon sun, but he took no joy in the sight. His thoughts remained anchored to that terrible day, to the slow recovery that followed, and to the growing distance between him and the woman he'd sworn to cherish until death. "You've been standing there for nearly an hour." The voice startled him. Nathan turned to find Willa approaching, her simple blue cotton dress billowing slightly in the breeze. Despite the illness that had ravaged her months before, she moved with determination, carrying a tin cup of water. Her chestnut hair was pulled back in a practical braid, but stray tendrils framed her face, softening the worried lines around her eyes. "Didn't realize I'd been out here so long," Nathan mumbled, accepting the water gratefully. He drank deeply, studying his wife over the rim of the cup. At 26, Willa Kearney Holt still possessed the beauty that had captivated him when they'd first met 4 years ago, though her illness had left her thinner, her cheekbones more prominent. Willa reached for his free hand, her touch hesitant but warm. "Come home, Nathan," she said softly, her eyes searching his. "Please. The doctor said I'm well now. We can't keep living like this." Nathan's throat tightened. Home. Their cabin stood less than a quarter-mile away, yet the distance between them stretched far greater. Since Willa's illness, a fever that had nearly claimed her life, he'd retreated into himself, spending countless hours in the fields alone, sleeping in the barn more nights than not. "I've got work to finish," he said, returning the empty cup and stepping back. "The harvest won't wait." Willa's expression fell, but she squared her shoulders. "The harvest can spare you for one evening. I've prepared a proper dinner, first time since." Her voice trailed off. Neither needed to be reminded. Nathan hesitated. The truth was, he didn't know how to be around her anymore. The illness had shown him how quickly he could lose her, and that knowledge terrified him more than any gun-toting outlaw ever could. Loving her this deeply made him vulnerable in ways he'd never imagined. "1 hour," he relented finally. "I'll be in after I check the western fence line." Relief softened her features. "I'll be waiting." She turned to go, then paused, looking back over her shoulder. "Nathan, I miss you." The simple honesty of her words struck him like a physical blow. He watched her walk away, unable to voice the truth that he missed her too, even though they shared the same 40 acres of Montana territory. As promised, Nathan returned to the cabin an hour later. The modest structure had been their first real home together, built with his own hands after they'd married in 1874. It wasn't much: 2 rooms with a stone fireplace, sturdy log walls, and a small porch, but it represented everything they'd worked for. The aroma of beef stew greeted him as he stepped inside. Willa stood at the stove, her back to him. For a moment, he allowed himself to remember how it used to be between them, the easy conversation, the casual touches, the shared laughter. Before fear had wedged itself between them like an uninvited guest. "Smells good," he offered awkwardly, hanging his hat on the peg by the door. Willa turned, a tentative smile on her lips. "It's ready when you are." They ate mostly in silence, the clink of spoons against bowls the only sound in the cabin. Nathan noticed Willa watching him, her gray eyes full of questions he wasn't sure how to answer. Mrs. Peterson from town brought me some books yesterday, she said finally, breaking the silence. She heard I was recovered and thought I might enjoy the reading. Nathan nodded. That was kind of her. She asked about you. Everyone does. Willa set down her spoon. They wonder why you haven't been to town in months. Been busy with the farm, he replied, though they both knew it wasn't the truth. He'd been avoiding town the same way he'd been avoiding their bed, their conversations, their life together. Nathan, Willa said softly, what happened to me wasn't your fault. His spoon clattered against the bowl. You collapsed 10 feet from where I was working. If I'd noticed sooner, then what? The fever would have come regardless. Dr. Simmons said so himself. You nearly died, Willa. The words hung in the air between them, stark and painful. But I didn't, she countered. I'm still here. Nathan pushed away from the table. For how long? This country is harsh. The winters, the droughts, the dangers. I bring you out here, away from your family in Pennsylvania, and for what? To watch you suffer. Willa stood too, color rising in her cheeks. I chose this life, Nathan Holt. I chose you. Do you think I don't know the risks? You think I regret it? Maybe you should, he said quietly. Well, I don't. She moved around the table toward him. What I regret is watching my husband turn into a stranger these past months. You work from dawn till dusk, you sleep in the barn, you barely speak to me. It's like you're punishing us both. Nathan turned away, unable to face the truth in her words. I should check on the horses. No. Willa's hand shot out, gripping his arm with surprising strength. Not this time. You're not walking away again. The determination in her voice stopped him. He looked down at her hand on his arm, then at her face flushed now with emotion, eyes bright with unshed tears. I'm afraid, he admitted, the words scraping his throat raw. Every time I look at you, I remember how close I came to losing you. I don't know how to live with that fear, Willa, her expression softened. By not living at all. By shutting me out when I need you most. She stepped closer. I was afraid too, still am some days. But being alone in this makes it worse, not better. Nathan felt something crack inside him, a dam breaking. He reached for her tentatively, pulling her against his chest. She came willingly, her arms wrapping around his waist. They stood like that for long minutes, holding each other in the fading light of day. I don't know how to fix this, he whispered into her hair. Willa pulled back enough to look up at him. Start by coming home, truly home, sleep beside me tonight. He nodded slowly, realizing how much he'd missed her warmth, her scent, the comfort of her presence. That night, for the first time in months, Nathan slept in their bed, Willa curled against him. But while his body returned to their shared space, his heart remained guarded, afraid to fully trust in their future together. The following morning dawned bright and clear. Nathan woke to find Willa already up, humming softly as she prepared breakfast. He watched her from the doorway, struck by the simple domesticity of the scene. For a brief moment, he allowed himself to hope that perhaps they could find their way back to each other. Good morning, she said, noticing him. I've made johnnycakes. He nodded, moving to the wash basin to splash cold water on his face. Thought I might ride to town today, pick up some supplies. Surprise flickered across Willa's features. I'd like to come with you if that's all right. Nathan hesitated. Since her illness, he'd been protective, insistent that she remain at the farm to rest. But the doctor had given her a clean bill of health weeks ago. It was his own fear keeping her isolated, not medical necessity. Of course, he said finally. Be good to have the company. The 12-mile ride to Cottonwood Creek took most of the morning. They traveled side by side, occasionally pointing out wildlife or commenting on the condition of neighboring farms. It wasn't the easy conversation they once shared, but it was a start. Cottonwood Creek had grown since they'd first settled in the area. What had once been little more than a trading post now boasted a general store, a small hotel, a doctor's office, and even a schoolhouse. As they rode down the main street, several people called out greetings, clearly pleased to see Willa in town again. "Mrs. Holt, what a wonderful surprise!" Margaret Peterson, the preacher's wife, hurried toward them as they hitched their horses outside the general store. "And Mr. Holt, too. We've missed seeing you both at Sunday services." Willa smiled warmly. "It's good to see you, Mrs. Peterson. Thank you again for the books." "Oh, it was nothing. I'm just delighted to see you looking so well." The older woman lowered her voice. "We were all so worried when we heard." "Such a dreadful fever." Nathan shifted uncomfortably beside Willa, and she subtly placed her hand on his arm. "Dr. Simmons took excellent care of me," she assured Mrs. Peterson, "and Nathan has barely left my side." The lie was kind, intended to spare him public scrutiny, but it stung nonetheless. While Dr. Simmons had indeed been attentive during Willa's illness, Nathan had been the one to withdraw as she recovered, not the steadfast husband she described. Inside the general store, they were greeted by Oscar Bailey, the proprietor. "Well, look who's finally graced us with their presence. Nathan and Willa Holt, as I live and breathe." "Hello, Mr. Bailey," Willa said warmly. "We've come for supplies. And not a moment too soon. Your account's been mighty quiet these past months." The shopkeeper winked to take any sting from his words. "What can I get for you folks today?" As Willa consulted the list she'd prepared, Nathan wandered the aisles of the store, fingering bolts of fabric and examining new tools. He'd forgotten how much he enjoyed these simple outings, being among people instead of alone with his thoughts. "Nathan, is that you?" He turned to find Samuel Wright, one of the few men he might have called a friend before he'd withdrawn from society. Samuel approached with a broad smile, extending his hand. "Good to see you, Sam," Nathan said, returning the handshake. "Likewise. Been wondering if you'd fallen off the face of the earth." Samuel's tone was light, but his eyes were questioning. "Heard about Willa's illness. Glad to see she's recovered." Nathan nodded stiffly. "We're managing." "Listen," Samuel lowered his voice. "Some of us are gathering tonight at Wilson's place. Poker game, few drinks, nothing wild. You should join us." The invitation was unexpected. Before Willa's illness, Nathan had occasionally enjoyed such gatherings, a chance to socialize with other men, to share stories and information about crops, weather, and the occasional bandit trouble. "I don't know, Sam." You should go," Willa said, approaching with her basket of purchases. She smiled at Samuel. "Hello, Mr. Wright. Mrs. Holt, looking lovely as ever." Samuel tipped his hat. "Just trying to convince your husband to be sociable for once." Willa's gaze met Nathan's. "I think it's a fine idea. I've kept you close to home long enough." There was no accusation in her tone, only understanding. Once again, she was offering him grace he wasn't sure he deserved. "Perhaps I will then," he said slowly, "if you're certain you don't mind." "I'll be fine for one evening," she assured him. "Besides, I have those books to keep me company." The ride home was more comfortable than the journey to town. Something had shifted between them, not a complete healing, but a tentative step toward it. As they approached their farm, Nathan found himself studying the land with fresh eyes. The fields he'd been tending mechanically for months suddenly looked alive with possibility again. "I've been thinking," he said as they unloaded their supplies, "maybe we should consider adding onto the cabin next spring. Another room, perhaps." Willa paused, a bag of flour in her arms. "Oh," he shrugged, suddenly self-conscious. "Just a thought, would give us more space. For the future." Understanding dawned in her eyes. Before her illness, they'd talked often of children, of building a family together. Those conversations had ceased entirely these past months. "I'd like that," she said softly. Very much. That evening, after a simple supper, Nathan prepared to ride to Wilson's farm for the poker game. Willa helped him brush his coat, straighten his collar, small, intimate gestures that reminded him of earlier days in their marriage. Don't lose the farm, she teased as he mounted his horse. Nathan surprised himself by smiling. I'll try to come home with more than I left with. Just come home, she replied, her expression growing serious. That's all I ask. The evening at Wilson's farm was more enjoyable than Nathan had anticipated. 6 men gathered around the rough-hewn table, sharing news, whiskey, and tall tales as they played hand after hand of poker. Nathan won some, lost more, but found himself relaxing for the first time in months. How's that wheat crop coming along, Holt? James Wilson asked, dealing a new hand. Fair to middling, Nathan replied. Drought didn't hit us as hard as some. You're lucky then. Henderson's lost near half their corn. Wilson took a sip of whiskey. Course they've had more than crops to worry about lately. Oh, Nathan raised an eyebrow, didn't you hear? Been some trouble with rustlers in the northern part of the county. 3 farms hit in the past month. Nathan frowned. Their farm was just south of the affected area. Anyone caught? Samuel shook his head. Sheriff's been tracking them, but no luck so far. Word is it might be the Danvers gang moved up from Wyoming. Danvers, the name was familiar. Thought they were locked up in Cheyenne. Brothers got out last spring, Wilson explained. Been causing trouble ever since. Small operations mostly, but they're getting bolder. Nathan's thoughts immediately went to Willa, alone at their farm. The cabin was secure enough, but if armed men were to approach. Maybe I should head back, he said, setting down his cards. Samuel chuckled. It's early yet, and your farm's a good 10 miles from where they've been spotted. Finish the hand at least. Reluctantly, Nathan stayed, but his mind was no longer on the game. By the time he finally headed home, the moon was high overhead, casting silver light across the prairie. The conversation about rustlers had reawakened his protective instincts, reminding him of all the dangers that threatened their isolated existence. The cabin was dark when he arrived, save for a single lantern left burning in the window. Inside, he found Willa asleep in their bed, one of Mrs. Peterson's books open on her chest. He removed it gently, marking her place before setting it aside. Willa stirred, blinking up at him sleepily. You're back. I am. He sat on the edge of the bed. Didn't mean to wake you. I wanted to wait up, she murmured. Did you win? Nathan smiled faintly. Not exactly, but I didn't lose much either. She nodded, her eyes already drifting closed again. That's good. He watched her for a moment, struck by a wave of tenderness so powerful it nearly overwhelmed him. Whatever walls he'd built these past months felt suddenly fragile. Willa, he whispered, I'm sorry for how I've been. But she was already asleep again, her breathing deep and even. Nathan changed into his nightshirt and climbed into bed beside her, careful not to disturb her rest. Tomorrow, he promised himself. Tomorrow he would find the words to bridge the gap between them. Morning brought with it a change in the weather. Dark clouds gathered on the horizon, promising a late summer storm. Nathan and Willa worked together to secure the farm, closing shutters, bringing in laundry from the line, ensuring the animals were safely sheltered. Will be good for the crops, Nathan observed as they finished the preparations. Been too dry lately. Willa nodded, watching the approaching clouds. Looks to be a big one. By mid-afternoon, the storm arrived in full force. Rain lashed against the cabin walls, wind howling around the eaves. Inside, Nathan and Willa sat before the fire, the forced confinement creating an intimacy they hadn't shared in months. I heard something at Wilson's last night, Nathan said, breaking a comfortable silence. There's been trouble with rustlers north of here. Willa looked up from her mending. Serious trouble, cattle stolen mostly. No violence reported yet. He hesitated. But I've been thinking it might be wise to take some precautions. Keep the rifle loaded, doors bolted at night. Of course, she agreed readily. Do you think there's real danger? Nathan considered the question. Probably not. They seem to be targeting larger operations. But still, I don't like the idea of leaving you alone until they're caught. Willa set aside her sewing, a slow smile spreading across her face. Does this mean you'll be sleeping in our bed regularly again? The directness of her question caught him off guard, but he found himself smiling in return. I suppose it does. Lightning flashed outside, followed by a tremendous clap of thunder that shook the cabin. Willa jumped, and without thinking, Nathan reached for her hand. She twined her fingers with his, the simple contact sending warmth up his arm. I've missed this, she said quietly, just being together. Nathan squeezed her hand gently. I have too. The storm raged through the night, but inside the cabin, a different kind of tempest was calming. They talked for hours, more openly than they had since before Willa's illness. Nathan spoke of his fears, of the helplessness he'd felt watching her burn with fever, of his belief that by loving her less openly, he might somehow protect himself from the pain of losing her. But it doesn't work that way, he admitted as midnight approached. Keeping my distance hasn't made me love you any less. It's only made us both miserable. Willa touched his face, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw. I never doubted your love, Nathan, even at your most distant. I just couldn't reach you. I'm here now, he promised, turning to kiss her palm. If you'll still have me. Her answer came not in words but in the way she leaned forward to press her lips to his tentatively at first, then with growing confidence as he responded. The kiss deepened, months of separation and longing pouring into the connection between them. That night, they rediscovered each other slowly, relearning the contours of familiar bodies made new again by absence. Afterward, Nathan held Willa close, her head resting on his chest, and felt truly at peace for the first time since that terrible day in the field. I love you, he whispered into the darkness. Never stopped, not for a moment. She pressed a kiss to his shoulder. I know, I've always known. The storm passed by morning, leaving behind puddles and bent grasses, but no serious damage to the farm. They rose early, working side by side to assess the impact and make necessary repairs. The easy rhythm they'd once shared in their daily tasks returned naturally, as if the months of estrangement had been washed away by the rain. Over the next few weeks, their relationship continued to heal. Nathan no longer avoided town or conversation with neighbors. He slept beside Willa every night, gradually letting go of the paralyzing fear that had gripped him for so long. They began to plan again for the harvest, for winter preparations, for the future they hoped to build together. But the peace they'd rediscovered was destined to be tested. In early September, as the first hints of autumn touched the trees surrounding their property, trouble finally found its way to their door. Nathan was in the field, bringing in the last of the wheat harvest, when he heard Willa calling his name. He looked up to see her running toward him, her skirts gathered in her hands. Riders coming, she gasped when she reached him. 4 of them from the north. Nathan squinted in the direction she pointed. Sure enough, a cloud of dust marked the approach of horsemen still too distant to identify. Might be nothing, he said, though his hand automatically went to the pistol he'd taken to wearing since hearing about the rustlers. Could be neighbors or the sheriff's men. They're riding fast, Willa observed, and they've circled around the back way, not using the main road. That detail troubled Nathan. Few legitimate visitors would approach their isolated farm from the less accessible northern route. Go back to the cabin, he instructed. Bolt the door and get the rifle ready. I'll come when I can see who they are. Willa hesitated. Nathan, please, Willa. He caught her hand. I need to know you're safe. She nodded reluctantly. Be careful. As Willa hurried back toward the cabin, Nathan climbed onto the stone wall that marked the boundary of their wheat field, straining to get a better view of the approaching riders. The men were closer now, moving at a steady gallop. Even from a distance, Nathan could tell they weren't locals. Their manner of riding, the way they spread out in a practiced formation, spoke of men accustomed to working together for less than honorable purposes. Nathan jumped down from the wall and began running toward the cabin, cutting across the field rather than taking the longer path around. He'd nearly reached the yard when the riders crested the final hill, coming into clear view. 4 men, heavily armed, with bandanas pulled up to cover the lower half of their faces. The Danvers gang, most likely, or others of their ilk. Nathan's heart hammered in his chest as he sprinted the final distance to the cabin, bursting through the door just as the riders entered the yard. Willa stood by the window, rifle in hand. They don't look friendly, she said, her voice remarkably steady despite the circumstances. No, they don't. Nathan reached for his own rifle, checking that it was loaded. Stay inside, away from the windows. I'll deal with them. Nathan, Willa began, but he cut her off. Please, Willa, I can't focus if I'm worrying about you. She pressed her lips together but nodded, moving to the side of the window where she could see out without being easily spotted. Nathan stepped onto the porch, rifle held ready but not aimed directly at the visitors. The 4 men reined their horses to a stop about 20 feet from the cabin. Something I can help you gentlemen with, Nathan called, keeping his tone neutral. The lead rider, a tall man with cold blue eyes visible above his bandana, surveyed the farm before answering. Just passing through, looking for water for our horses. Creek's about a mile east, Nathan replied. You're welcome to it. Mighty hospitable, the man drawled. But we're tired of riding, thought we might rest here a spell. His eyes shifted to the cabin behind Nathan. Looks like a comfortable place. It suits us well enough, Nathan said carefully, but we're not set up for visitors. Creek's your best bet. Another rider, shorter and stockier than the leader, laughed unpleasantly. Hear that, Jed? Man's not feeling hospitable after all. The leader, Jed, shrugged. That's a shame. His hand moved to rest on the pistol at his hip. Because we really are tired. And I see you've got a fine barn there for our horses. Probably food in that cabin too. Nathan's grip tightened on his rifle. You'd best move on. Or what? The third rider spat tobacco juice onto the ground. 1 man against 4. Those ain't good odds, mister. Nathan. Willa's voice came from inside the cabin. Everything all right? Jed's eyes lit up. Well now, didn't mention you had company. My wife, Nathan said evenly. Who's also armed. This gave the men pause. They exchanged glances, clearly reassessing the situation. Look, Nathan continued. I don't want trouble. You don't want trouble. There's nothing here worth dying for. The marshal's been looking for rustlers in these parts. You really want to add murder to those charges? For a tense moment, no one spoke. Then Jed laughed, though the sound held no humor. You've got spine, I'll give you that. He straightened in his saddle. Tell you what, we'll take some water for our horses, maybe a bit of food for the road, and be on our way. No fuss, no trouble. Nathan knew he was being offered a compromise, give them something or risk a fight. With Willa inside, he couldn't afford to be reckless. There's a pump by the barn, he said finally. Help yourselves to water. I'll have my wife pack some food. Then you ride on and don't come back. Jed nodded slowly. Fair enough. The men dismounted, leading their horses toward the barn. Nathan kept his rifle ready as he backed toward the cabin door. Food for 4, he said quietly to Willa. Nothing we can't spare, make it quick. Willa moved efficiently, gathering bread, dried meat, and apples into a cloth sack. Meanwhile, Nathan watched through the window as the men watered their horses, their body language suggesting they were discussing options. They might not leave peacefully, he warned Willa. She handed him the sack of food. If it comes to fighting, I can shoot. I know you can. He'd taught her himself not long after they were married. But let's hope it doesn't come to that. Nathan returned to the porch. The men were still by the barn, horses drinking from the trough. Food's here, he called. Take it and go. Jed approached, hands conspicuously away from his weapons. He took the sack, peering inside before nodding with satisfaction. Appreciate the hospitality, he said, though his eyes remained cold. Might be we'll pass by again someday. Might be you shouldn't, Nathan replied steadily. A flash of anger crossed Jed's face, but he mastered it quickly. We'll be going then. The men mounted up, Jed distributing the food among them. They rode slowly out of the yard, looking back several times before finally disappearing over the hill to the north. Nathan remained on the porch until they were well out of sight, then hurried inside to find Willa still holding the rifle, her face pale but determined. Are they gone? She asked. For now, he confirmed. But I don't trust them. We need to be ready if they decide to return. They spent the rest of the day securing the farm as best they could, checking locks, boarding up the most vulnerable windows, moving valuable items to less obvious hiding places. By nightfall, they were exhausted but as prepared as possible. We should take turns keeping watch, Nathan suggested as they ate a simple dinner. I'll take the first shift. Willa shook her head. We'll both stay awake. I couldn't sleep anyway. He didn't argue. Having her beside him was a comfort, and truth be told, he was reluctant to let her out of his sight. The night passed slowly, each creak and rustle outside the cabin setting them on edge. They spoke in hushed tones, planning what they would do if the riders returned. Sometime past midnight, Nathan realized that despite the danger, despite the fear, he felt more connected to Willa than he had in months. Facing a threat together had stripped away the last of the barriers between them. I'm sorry, he said suddenly. Willa looked at him questioningly. For what? For pushing you away when I should have been holding you closer, for letting fear rule me. He took her hand. If something happens, don't, she interrupted. Nothing's going to happen. We'll face whatever comes together. Dawn arrived without incident. As the first light filtered through the cracks in the boarded windows, they allowed themselves to relax slightly. Maybe they really did just move on, Willa suggested, stretching her stiff limbs. Nathan wasn't convinced. Maybe. But I think we should. The sound of approaching hoofbeats cut him off. They froze, exchanging alarmed glances before rushing to the window. Nathan peered through a small gap in the boards. It's Sheriff Taylor, he reported with relief, and 3 deputies. They hurried outside to meet the lawmen as they rode into the yard. Sheriff Robert Taylor, a grizzled veteran of both the Civil War and frontier law enforcement, tipped his hat to Willa before addressing Nathan. Holt, wanted to check on you folks. Caught 2 of the Danvers gang about 10 miles north of here last night. They had food on them that Mrs. Peterson recognized as the kind Willa makes. They were here yesterday, Nathan confirmed. 4 men. They took water and food, then left. The sheriff nodded grimly. Lucky that's all they took. These boys have left bodies behind elsewhere. He dismounted, stretching his back. The 2 we caught, Jed Danvers himself and his cousin, were happy to tell us the others were planning to circle back here. Seems they took a liking to your farm. Willa moved closer to Nathan, who instinctively put his arm around her shoulders. When? He asked. Today, most likely. That's why we rode straight here. Sheriff Taylor gestured to his deputies. We'll set up and wait for them. If you folks want to clear out for a while, no, Nathan said firmly. This is our home. We'll stay and help." The sheriff studied him for a moment, then nodded. "Your choice, but the missus might be safer in town." "I'm staying too," Willa declared. "I can shoot, and I know this farm better than any deputy." A hint of a smile touched the sheriff's weathered face. "Yes, madam, never doubted it." He turned to his men. "Johnson, take the barn. Davis, the north approach. Williams, cover the east. I'll take the south road. Mr. Holt, you and the missus keep watch from the cabin. Anyone sees dust, give the signal." The hours that followed were tense. The deputies positioned themselves strategically around the property while Nathan and Willa kept vigil from the cabin. By mid-afternoon, there was still no sign of the remaining outlaws. "Maybe they changed their minds when Jed didn't return," Willa suggested as she brought Nathan a cup of coffee. "Maybe," he agreed, though he remained vigilant at the window. It was nearly dusk when Deputy Johnson's warning whistle pierced the air. Nathan immediately spotted what had alerted him: a pair of riders approaching cautiously from the northwest, using the trees for cover. "Sheriff Taylor's moving to intercept," Nathan reported to Willa. "The deputies are closing in from the sides." What happened next unfolded with frightening speed. The outlaws, realizing they'd ridden into a trap, split up and galloped toward the cabin, guns blazing. Sheriff Taylor and his men returned fire, but the bandits were moving too erratically to hit easily. "Get down," Nathan shouted to Willa as bullets splintered the wood near the window. He raised his rifle, taking careful aim at the closer rider. The shot found its mark. The outlaw tumbled from his horse, rolling in the dirt. But the second man kept coming, diving from his mount to take cover behind the water trough just 30 yards from the cabin. Gunfire erupted from all sides as the deputies converged. The outlaw behind the trough returned fire desperately, one bullet shattering the cabin window and showering Nathan with glass. "Nathan!" Willa cried out, rushing to his side. "I'm all right," he assured her, wiping blood from a small cut on his cheek. "Stay down." Outside, Sheriff Taylor was calling for the outlaw to surrender. The only response was another volley of gunfire. "He's pinned down," Nathan observed. "Can't escape, but he's got good cover." The standoff continued for several tense minutes. Then, suddenly, the outlaw made a desperate break for the barn, firing wildly as he ran. Multiple shots rang out. The man staggered, took 2 more steps, then collapsed face down in the dirt. Silence fell over the farm. Sheriff Taylor approached the fallen outlaw cautiously, kicking his gun away before checking for signs of life. He looked up at the cabin and shook his head. The threat was over. As the sun set over Cottonwood Valley, Nathan and Willa sat on their porch, watching Sheriff Taylor and his deputies prepare to depart with the bodies of the outlaws. The farm was scarred by the conflict: bullet holes in the cabin walls, trampled gardens, blood staining the earth, but they were safe, and together. "You folks should be left in peace now," Sheriff Taylor said, mounting his horse. "All 4 Danvers accounted for. 2 headed to trial, 2 headed to the undertaker." "Thank you, Sheriff," Nathan said sincerely. "We're grateful for your help." Taylor tipped his hat. "Just doing my job. You 2 take care now." As the lawman rode away, Willa leaned against Nathan's shoulder. "It's over," she murmured. He nodded, drawing her closer. "It is." They remained on the porch long after darkness fell, watching stars appear in the vast Montana sky. The events of the day had shaken them both, but Nathan felt a curious sense of clarity emerging from the chaos. "When I saw that bullet come through the window," he said quietly, "all I could think was that I couldn't lose you, not after finding you again." Willa turned to face him. "You won't lose me, Nathan, not to illness, not to outlaws." She smiled softly. "I'm stronger than you think." "I know that now." He brushed a strand of hair from her face. "You've always been the brave one," she laughed lightly. "Says the man who faced down 4 armed outlaws. That's different. Physical courage is easy." He took her hands in his. "What you did fighting that fever, then fighting to bring me back when I was lost in my own fear, that takes real strength." Willa's eyes shimmered in the moonlight. "We're stronger together. That's what I've been trying to tell you." "I understand now," he promised. "No more running, no more hiding. Whatever comes, we face it side by side." The following spring brought new beginnings to the Holt farm. True to his word, Nathan built the additional room onto their cabin, a sunny space with large windows facing east. Willa filled it with handmade furniture, colorful quilts, and hopeful expectations. Their relationship had emerged from the trials of the previous year transformed. The distance that had once existed between them was replaced by a deeper understanding, a more resilient bond forged in the crucible of fear, separation, and reunion. On a warm May morning, Nathan stood once again in the field where Willa had collapsed the year before. But this time, he wasn't alone with painful memories. This time, Willa walked toward him carrying water, her free hand resting on the gentle swell of her belly. "Thought you might be thirsty," she said, offering him the cup. Nathan accepted it gratefully, his gaze moving from her face to her stomach and back again. Even after 4 months, the knowledge that they were to be parents still filled him with wonder and, occasionally, trepidation. "How are you feeling?" he asked, his hand automatically reaching out to touch her middle. "Strong," she assured him, covering his hand with her own. "Doctor says everything is progressing perfectly." Nathan nodded, though a shadow of worry crossed his features. "I was thinking maybe we should consider moving closer to town before the baby comes. Be nearer to the doctor." Willa studied his face. "Is that what you want, to leave our home?" "I want you to be safe," he said honestly. "Both of you. We are safe," she replied. "This is our land, Nathan. The home we've built together." She looked around at the flourishing fields, the expanded cabin, the orchard they'd planted the previous autumn. "Our child will grow up here, running through these fields, climbing those hills. I don't want to be anywhere else." Nathan considered her words. The fear of losing her, of losing them both, hadn't disappeared entirely. Perhaps it never would. But he'd learned that living in fear was no life at all. "All right," he agreed finally. "But we're making arrangements for the doctor to stay with us when your time comes. No arguments on that." Willa smiled, triumph sparkling in her eyes. "Already discussed it with Dr. Simmons. He's agreed to come when we send word and stay until the baby arrives." Nathan laughed, shaking his head in admiration. "Always one step ahead of me, aren't you?" "Someone has to be," she teased, tugging him toward the cabin. "Come home now. I've made lunch and you've been out here long enough." As they walked together across the field where their greatest trial had begun, Nathan reflected on the journey that had brought them to this point. From the day he'd watched Willa collapse in this very spot, through months of illness and recovery, his retreat into fear and their slow path back to each other, to the confrontation that had finally laid his demons to rest, every step had led to this moment of quiet joy. "What are you thinking about?" Willa asked as they reached the cabin porch. Nathan paused, looking back at the field they'd just crossed, then at the woman beside him, his wife, his partner, the mother of his unborn child. "I'm thinking that I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be," he said simply. Willa squeezed his hand. "Come home," she whispered, echoing the words that had begun their healing months before. And Nathan did, not just in body but in heart and spirit as well. Truly home at last. In October of that year, their daughter was born, Catherine Willa Holt, named for both her mother and her maternal grandmother. She arrived after a long labor that tested Willa's strength and Nathan's nerves, but when Dr. Simmons finally placed the squalling infant in her father's arms. All the fear and pain of the past melted away. "She's perfect," Nathan whispered, carefully transferring the tiny bundle to Willa's waiting embrace. "She is," Willa agreed, her exhausted face radiant with joy. Over the following years, the Holt family prospered. Catherine Katie, to her adoring parents, grew into a spirited child with her mother's determination and her father's quiet strength. 2 years after her birth, she was joined by a brother, William Nathan, completing their family. The farm expanded as well. Nathan purchased adjoining land when it became available, planted new crops, built better fences. Cottonwood Valley itself grew, with more families settling in the area, bringing new opportunities and connections. Through it all, Nathan and Willa remained each other's anchors. The lessons they'd learned during that difficult time never faded. That love required courage, that true strength came from vulnerability, and that home wasn't just a place, but a choice made every day to return to each other. On summer evenings, they would often sit on their expanded porch, watching their children play in the yard as the sun set over the fields that had witnessed both their greatest trials and their most profound joys. "You ever think about how close we came to losing all this?" Willa asked one such evening, her head resting on Nathan's shoulder. He considered the question, watching 7-year-old Katie chase her 5-year-old brother around the oak tree they'd planted the year after their daughter's birth. "Sometimes," he admitted. "But then I remember that we didn't lose it. We found it again." He pressed a kiss to her temple. "And I'm grateful every day that you had the courage to bring me water and tell me to come home." Willa smiled, twining her fingers with his. "Best words I ever spoke." As darkness settled over Cottonwood Valley, the Holts gathered their children and went inside together, closing the door on the vast Montana wilderness. Outside, the stars emerged, the same stars that had witnessed their struggle and their triumph, their separation and their reunion. Inside, in the warm light of the cabin they had built with their own hands, Nathan and Willa Holt continued the story they had nearly lost, a story of family, of perseverance, and of a love strong enough to overcome even the most profound fears. And in the field where it had all begun, where Willa had once fallen ill and later brought water to her estranged husband, wildflowers now grew in abundance, covering the earth with new life, testament to the resilience of the land and the people who called it home.